Hello everyone, this is Leah Whitehorse, and in this recording I'm going to be talking about Saturn retrograde step by step. So this recording comes from an old article that I posted on my website years ago, so it's like the video version of this article. And it was prompted originally by reading the book Retrograde Planets by Erin Sullivan, who is now sadly passed away. But she did actually comment on my article. The comment is still there. So it was really generous of her and nice of her to do that. And what I did in the article was that I explored her understanding of the retrograde cycle of Saturn, and also then added in my own thoughts and kind of observations about this cycle. Now, I just wanted to mention before I get into it that in this recording I'm going to be mentioning the dates for 2024 going through to 2025. But if you're coming to this recording sometime in the future, then you can find out the dates for your relevant year over on my website. The written version of this article is over there, and I update it every year with the new dates for these aspects. So this year, Saturn went into the shadow zone of its retrograde period. That was on the 24th of March 2024. It will station retrograde on the 29th of June 2024. It'll station direct on the 15th of November 2024. And then the culmination of the cycle when Saturn leaves the shadow zone of the retrograde will be on the 18th of February 2025. So when we're talking about retrograde cycles, we are also talking about the relationship that the planets have and we have to the Sun. This goes for all retrograde cycles. As we know, Earth revolves around the Sun, as do all of the rest of the planets in our solar system. The Sun is the creator as far as astrology is concerned. It is the force of all life. Without the Sun, we would not be here. So the Earth takes 1 year to revolve around the Sun, but the other planets in our solar system, because they are closer or further away from the Sun compared to the Earth, they take a different amount of time to complete that circuit. So with a retrograde, obviously the planet isn't actually moving backwards. It's just an optical illusion. So the best way to think about this is, imagine you are on a racetrack and you are there driving in your Porsche, and Saturn is there driving his 1968 Morris Minor. I'm choosing that car because I absolutely love classic cars and I used to have a 1968 Morris Minor. So you're in your Porsche, Saturn is in the Morris Minor. And so obviously your Porsche is going to go faster than the Morris Minor. And what happens is, as you overtake that other car, for a moment, it seems as though it's looking backwards. I think we've all had the experience when we're pulling away from a bus stop and we're busy staring out the window, looking at the cars on the other side. And there's that moment when we have the optical illusion that everything else seems to be moving backwards. That is exactly what is happening in disguise because of these different rates of motion that the planets take a different period of time to rotate around the Sun, and they are all moving at different speeds. So it means then that the retrogrades are directly related to our positions in our passage around the Sun, and therefore it stands to reason that the aspects that Saturn or any retrograde planet makes to the Sun, these are very important. They are like markers the sun is acting like a highlighter pen, emphasizing particular issues or particular areas of life that are triggered by the retrograde cycle. And so by following the journey of these aspects that the retrograde planet makes to the transiting sun, the retrograde period as a whole starts to make a lot more sense. So what I'm going to do now is go step by step and explore each part of this retrograde cycle for Saturn. So, of course, the first thing that happens in the retrograde cycle is that Saturn stations retrograde. So this is the point when the Earth has caught up with Saturn on its orbit, and now we're in that Porsche Morris Minor moment, and suddenly as we kind of overtake Saturn, Saturn appears to start to move backwards. But there is a moment just before that where it seems as though it's completely stationary. So that is the station retrograde, the moment when it appears as though the planet is just kind of hanging there in space, not going forwards or not going backwards. And so given that Saturn is associated with time, we could say as Saturn stations retrograde, it is as if time stops. And if Saturn is within sort of 1 or 2 degrees of an aspect to your natal chart, to a planet or an angle, Saturn is then sort of labouring over that point. Erin Sullivan suggests that Saturn encapsulates the planet, sealing it off, preventing any contamination by external influence. That's a direct quote. A station over a planet or a point is kind of like conception. The whole retrograde cycle equates to roughly around 9 months. And if we sort of continue with that analogy, if you sort of think about the moment of conception when the sperm fertilizes the egg and the cells start to divide, that cell division process, that little spark of life, bears very little similarity to what arrives, 9 months later. So it's very difficult to see at the beginning of the retrograde cycle how the end will manifest. But we just know that there is a connection between what is happening at the station retrograde and what is happening at the end. And we could also think about how Saturn is connected to the idea of responsibilities. So just as we have a baby, when we have the baby, then we're kind of having to take on all of that new responsibility. It's the same with Saturn retrograde. Something is seeded as Saturn stations retrograde, and then at the end of that cycle, we're going to have a bouncing new responsibility to take care of. So even if the station is not aspecting any important points in your natal chart, it's very likely that you'll still experience a sense of things slowing down in the area of life where Saturn is transiting, sort of represented by the house where Saturn is transiting. And sometimes we can even feel a sense of lethargy or a depression or a feeling that we're kind of stuck. And there's this kind of internal prompt that we need to get serious about this particular area of life. That is what Saturn is saying. You need to get serious here. The next stage of the Saturn retrograde cycle is the Sun's trine to Saturn. This year it's on the 11th of July 2024. If you didn't notice what was happening when Saturn stationed retrograde, this trine will trigger it into action. Erin Sullivan says the Sun collects the energy of the stationing planet and manifests it. At the trine, we get a sense of what we need to work on and what might be possible. Remember, the Sun is a creative force, so it is imbuing this retrograde at the trine with this creative energy. But we've also got to be patient because Saturn is retrograde, and therefore things are going to take time. It's all about the inner growth right now. The next stage is when the Sun forms a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. This is a waxing sesquiquadrate, and it's going to be on the 26th of July 2024. And this aspect I often see as being a little bit unwieldy, and at this particular point it can feel like a build up to an argument. So in other words, we sort of get this feeling that some kind of tension is mounting, and whatever the issue is, it's not going away. So there's a little bit of antagonism going on when the Sun forms a sesquiquadrate to Saturn. So at this point in the cycle, it can be really helpful to look at where is the Sun now transiting in your chart, because that is illuminating the area of life affected. For Saturn to do his job, it's kind of saying the ego needs to give way, or it needs to compromise. But at this point, because this aspect is somewhat tense, we can struggle to hold on to our point of view, struggle to hold on to this sort of aspect of our identity that is saying, no, this is the way I want things to be. So in other words, we start to resist. And Saturn is very much associated with the concept of resistance. So as the Sun forms a waxing sesquiquadrate to Saturn, we start to get this resistance that is pushing us to address how we are seeing things, how we see ourselves, and where we might be resisting this process. From there, the next stage is the Sun's Quincunx to Saturn, and this occurs on the 10th of August. And so at this point, we're often trying to figure out what are my priorities here. How can I fix this situation? I see the Quincunx as being quite a fated aspect. And so often I see this manifesting as it's almost like the universe, God, fate, whatever you want to call it, kind of puts something in your line of sight and it captures your attention. And we get a bit of a struggle because the Quincunx, like a sesquiquadrate, has some tension to it. And often the issue with the Quincunx is that we feel as though we're sort of damned if we do, damned if we don't. If you're pleasing one side of the Quincunx, then you're annoying the other side of the Quincunx. So now you've got to make some kind of small adjustments. Some kind of small adjustment is needed. The universe brings this to your attention. And so we get this feeling that, now I seem to know what way I need to go. But we also get the irritation because it feels like something is still niggling us and we don't quite know how to handle this, how to manage it. Saturn speaks of management. And again, the house positions of both Saturn and the Sun are going to show you what areas of life are being indicated here and where fate may step in to give you a cosmic clue. We then come to the midpoint of the Saturn retrograde cycle, and this is when the Sun is opposite Saturn this year on the 8th of September. And Saturn is kind of moving its fastest at this point in the retrograde. It's not sort of moving as fast as it will ever go in its orbit. But during the retrograde, it's really gathered speed in this backward motion now, and it is bringing things to a head. So now, because the Sun is illuminating, if you think about it, it's rather like the full moon. When we have a full moon, the Sun and the moon are opposite one another. So now we have the Sun and Saturn opposite to one another. It's the full moon moment of the Saturn retrograde cycle. And all the issues are now out in the open. The Sun and Saturn can see each other on the opposite side of the fence. And this is a time when we must break down rigid concepts. We can no longer resist what Saturn is trying to teach us. Again, the houses where this opposition falls is going to show us where the changes are occurring and where new structures are necessary so that when Saturn begins to move forwards again, this is something that we can actually work on. Sometimes when the Sun opposes Saturn, we can have a little bit of a feeling that we're trapped, we're stuck again, we're feeling like we've got to move mountains, or we're frustrated because we know what we need to get done, but it seems really difficult to kind of push ourselves to do it. But Saturn's just there saying, come on, you can do this. And it has to be done. So either you do it today or you do it tomorrow. Either way, you are going to need to do it. It's not necessarily about making some kind of dramatic decision or massive move. Again, it's an internal process with Saturn being retrograde, but there is a strong push to take responsibility at this point. And that just means we need to address our ability to respond. The word responsibility carries weight. We don't like that word a lot of the time, but all it means is your ability to respond. So if you're responding negatively to the things that need to get done to change your situation or to restructure or to deal with resistance, if you're struggling with that, then it's just about looking at how am I responding to this, because I have other abilities that I can bring in here. I have other skills. Saturn is always helping us to grow. And in fact, one of the symbols that I use for this step of the Saturn retrograde cycle with the opposition to the Sun is that this is like the moment when a snake is shedding its skin. So to grow, a snake has to shed its skin, otherwise the skin gets too tight. And that is kind of like Saturn. We often have this feeling of being more and more and more and more restricted until we kind of push off these fears that we're experiencing, the limiting thoughts that we have about ourselves. We need to shed those, says Saturn. You need to shed this so that you can grow. Remember, Saturn rules the skin as well as the bones. Now, during that time, if you've ever kind of watched a snake shedding its skin, and particularly in the wild, this is a time when actually they are quite vulnerable because they have to stay very still, and clearly they are very compromised whilst they're trying to wiggle out of their old skin. And when they have come out of the old skin, the new skin is very soft and sensitive. And so again, this is like how we feel at this period of time. We know now that we've got to move past these limitations and there's no going back. We can't get back into the old skin, but we are going to feel a little bit sensitive. We don't know if what we have created is going to actually protect us. So moving on from that step, we then come to the Sun's waning quincunx to Saturn. This is on the 6th of October. So once again, we hit a period of readjustment. So whatever occurred when we had the first quincunx of this cycle, now we can no longer resist the tide. It's nudging us to get our attention. And the waning quincunx offers us the opportunity to start making these necessary changes. We're no longer resisting. We're starting to try out this new skin. We're aware that our old support systems and defense systems, they're no longer working for us. They aren't there anymore. And so it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. And yet, because it is a quincunx, which is a fated aspect, we start to feel that even though it's uncomfortable, we know it's right. We know that we're on the right road. So following the waning quincunx, we then get a waning sesquiquadrate. And this is on the 21st of October. So if the waxing sesquiquadrate was the build up to an argument, remember I was saying before, it can feel like that. There's something in the air, there's an atmosphere, people are biting back words. Now we're the other side of that. We could say the waxing sesquiquadrate is the building of the argument. The Sun opposite to Saturn is the argument blowing up. And then the waning sesquiquadrate is, okay, we've had the argument, we've got it all out in the open. We haven't quite forgiven and forgotten just yet, but we're starting to talk to one another. So I just want to clarify that a lot of this argument is something that's going on internally. Obviously, sometimes things can manifest externally with oppositions in particular. Those aspects can often involve another person. But the general symbolism here is that we've now dealt with the thing that was causing us the biggest problem and the most concern, the biggest worry. And now we're starting to figure out how we can all get along with each other, but also get along with these aspects of the self that we've been sort of fighting with. But we've learned to compromise, and now we're starting to feel a little older and wiser. And it's also a really good time for checking in with your boundaries to make sure that your kind of new boundaries are where they're meant to be, because the changes that have occurred have naturally reset your boundaries. And so it might just, again, mean some kind of adjustment. Sometimes we can go overboard with the sesquiquadrate. We can put up huge boundaries because we don't want to get into the same situation again. But if the boundary is too high, if our walls are too high, then nobody can get in. And if we do the opposite, make our boundaries too lax because we don't want to get into the same situation again, then of course other people can encroach on our territory, encroach on our lives. So the waning sesquiquadrate from the Sun to Saturn in the cycle is a time to check in with where are my boundaries and are they working for me? But still, even though this is a bit tense, there is a growing feeling that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And then we get the light with the Sun trine to Saturn once again, just before Saturn stations direct. This is on the 4th of November. So the Sun trine to Saturn retrograde. Now Saturn is at its absolute slowest in the retrograde cycle. In around 12 days' time, it will start to move into direct motion. So we're in the tunnel. And we see that tiny little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but it seems like it's taking forever. And often we want to speed things up. And Erin Sullivan actually says in her book, don't be impatient at this stage. Let Saturn do what he needs to do. Let the growth happen in the way it's supposed to happen. If we go back to the initial idea that the Saturn retrograde cycle happens to be around 9 months, and therefore we're talking about from conception to birth, this Sun trine to Saturn, 12 days before Saturn stations direct, is only around 18 weeks into this symbolic pregnancy. And in fact, around that time, women start to experience a quickening, what's called the quickening. So getting those flutters, the experience of the child being in the womb, kind of knowing that there is a real little person sort of growing in there. So with this trine, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting these flutters of excitement that tell us that something is going to be born soon, that there is going to be this growth that we're looking for. But again, we can start to feel a bit impatient because we want to get past all of that and just get to the nice bit at the end when we're cuddling the baby. So the Sun trine to Saturn is exciting, but we're also cautioned to allow things to grow and develop in their own time and not try to rush the process. And finally, Saturn stations direct this year on the 15th of November 2024 at 12 degrees and 41 minutes of the sign Pisces. So Saturn stations direct, it appears to move forwards again, and we emerge from that metaphorical tunnel. So we come out into the open and we're sort of blinking our eyes and trying to, adjust to this new reality, to the new reality that we see. And we're often more aware now that the resistance that we were feeling, the struggle that we were having, the horrendous waiting for things to change, that starts to dissipate. We're aware that it's starting to move away, and we're beginning to feel as though, okay, I've got this situation now. I can really start to build in the outer world, because the whole point of the retrograde cycle is to challenge all of these limitations within ourselves, so that when Saturn goes forward again, as he is now in this part of the cycle, once he goes forwards again, we can then start to create out there in the world. We can manifest, we can climb the mountain, we can achieve, we can get the job, do the career, make the business, have the babies, whatever it is we're doing that is going to involve a lot of responsibility and discipline and the contribution that we're making to the outer world. So this is the point when we start to see this landscape opening up in front of us, and a lot of that frustration and struggle that we're experiencing begins to fall away. The cycle culminates when Saturn exits the shadow zone. So in other words, it comes back to the point where it was when it originally stationed retrograde. So Saturn will exit the shadow zone of this current retrograde period on the 18th of February 2025. And that is the point when we give birth. So this long, laborious process, this long labor is over, and this new part of our lives or new aspect of ourselves has finally been born. And again, it could be something literal, a job, or the end of a very long project, or it could even be a culmination in a relationship. You're going to have a better idea of what that might be by looking at where is Saturn transiting in your chart, because that's the house, that's the area of life that he is working on. So to understand what is being manifested, you just need to look at where Saturn is transiting in your chart. So as you can hear, the aspects that are made between the Sun and Saturn throughout the retrograde cycle, with any retrograde cycle of Saturn, there are specific developments at each stage. Saturn's job is to deconstruct, to take things apart, to get the house back to its foundations if necessary, so that we can have a better foundation for our future. Saturn retrograde often will point out where we feel like we don't know enough, and where our fears are holding us back, and again where our defenses or our boundaries are too high. And even though Saturn retrograde can be frustrating sometimes, we must always remember that he's working with our best interests at heart. Remember, transits are happening for us, not to us. And if we are open and willing to learn and willing to work with it, then the Saturn retrograde cycle can actually be truly transformative and show us what we are really capable of. I think that's the problem a lot of the time, that we don't trust ourselves, we don't support ourselves. Saturn is the inner parent, one of the inner parents. So we don't always support ourselves in our endeavors. We kind of work ourselves to death trying to, accomplish this or that, whatever it is. But if we don't have that internal structure, then it's easy to fall apart. It's easy to get burned out. It's easy to feel like, I've just had enough of everything. The flip side of Saturn is very dour and depressed and kind of, pessimistic about life. So the Saturn retrograde cycle can really help us to address all of these issues. So I hope this explanation of the Saturn retrograde cycle has been helpful to give you a deeper understanding of how to work with this cycle. Again, do get hold of Erin Sullivan's book. It's a really excellent book. I will leave a link below to all my social media, my Patreon, my Substack. If you like my work, do check those out. If you like this video, please do click a like and subscribe. I will see you again soon. And in the meantime, I wish you many blessings on your path.